This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit. What do you guys want to talk about?
Sometimes I really do wonder to myself, Tommy, why do you do it? Why do you subject yourself to so much bad wrestling content? I don't know. All in good fun, I guess. I would like to think it's for the people, but the more I think about it, I guess there's always going to be that part of me that is still patiently waiting for things to turn around for the better. I've been holding on to that lost cause for well over 15 years now. At some point, things will get better. Right? Right. Well, I will at least say this. AEW did something right this weekend. So it wasn't all for naught. The WWE side of things, I don't know what they're trying to perpetrate on that Friday night show. But wrestling ain't it. Plus there's the retro Raw stuff we're doing, and yeah, it sounded like a good idea at the time. When we went back and started working our way through the archives of Raw from the summer of '93, remember the Lex Express campaign? The Yokozuna Body Slam Challenge on the USS Intrepid? Just remember how lively and fun some of those shows were? Even if the matches were never all that great, there's just the general environment of the room. It was a new, fresh product. It was a new idea, a new concept. People were excited. Something happened between then and now. Because we're in the summer of '94 right now, and I'll tell you, man, whatever spark they had going on 12 months prior, that has long since died out. And we'll get to all that in short order. This is going to be an interesting show in the sense that I don't entirely know whether or not this will be a regular Monday format going forward. I mean, if you've been watching this channel for the last couple years now, I played hot potato with so many things on this channel. I'm yet to really settle on a long-term format for both shows. At one point, the Friday show was like the busiest show we did because we were doing the Dynamite reports, the 2 classic retro reviews. It took up a lot of time. And the Monday one was the one that was kind of hit and miss depending on whether or not there was a pay-per-view that weekend. Now we might be flipping the coin to where the Monday show might be the busier podcast in comparison to the Friday one. And I'd like to try and balance out the workload for both shows so that the Friday show doesn't just end up becoming the Crockett TV and the Dallas reviews. I'd like to try and fit some modern wrestling on there in some way. Here's the problem, though. If I remove Dynamite from the equation going forward, that leaves us with SmackDown and Collision, both of which are weekend shows. So if I saved either of those reviews for the following Friday, they'd all be redundant by the time those shows went up. So I don't know if I really want to do that. Doing the Collision, the SmackDown, and the Retro Raw reviews on one podcast, it's not entirely horrible. The problem with SmackDown and Collision is that they're both 2 hours apiece, so it's a lot of wrestling to be recapping in one sitting. With SmackDown, though, we normally gloss over like half the program anyway. So it's not even like a thorough recap of the show most of the time. Most of the reporting is, hey, look, the Bloodline did some cool stuff. And then there were some matches that nobody gave a crap about. I mean, that's pretty much my entire SmackDown rundown in a nutshell. With Collision, it's a new experiment. It's a new show idea. I'll probably give it a little more detailed analysis for the time being, considering there was actually some stuff on that show that I found enjoyable and worth paying attention to. That also helps. So that basically leaves Dynamite in one of those purgatorial states where I basically need to make a decision soon as to whether or not I want to even bother continuing to indulge myself with that disaster of a program. Here's the thing. I'm hesitant to permanently remove it from our Friday show in the case that there are viewers that watch my channel that strictly come around to watch the Dynamite reports. For whatever reason, they may find my ranting entertaining. I don't know. But seeing as how Collision looks to be a more promising show, at least in the interim, I may be willing to sacrifice the Dynamite reviews entirely. But again, I'm not settled one way or the other, so if you're a person that comes back to this channel to listen to the Dynamite rants, at least for the time being, you can breathe a sigh of relief. I don't know how long that trend will continue, but we'll see. I mean, I don't really have a whole lot of free time to be dishing out right now anyway. Summer's a bit of a down period, but my schedule gets kind of crazy sometimes. The other thing I haven't taken into account yet is that there are also pay-per-views over the weekend that I have to review, so it's going to be a lot of content. It really is, man. So I'm going to have to do some deep thinking over the next couple weeks. But anyway, got a big one in store for today. So let me take a swig of my coffee here. My signature tumbler gimmick that you cannot see because I do not do video on these reviews. I do have one, though. I won't plug the company because I don't do sponsors. But we're going to need that caffeine boost to get us through this one. Starting with Retro Raw here. And for the record, I'll go ahead and just point this out too. Provided we stick with this new format on the Monday shows, that doesn't mean that I've settled with doing the Retro Raw reports first. I might change it up on occasion and do the Collision reviews at the top of the show. But we'll see. For this one, I'm going to cover all the WWF content first, and then we'll do the AEW review in the final segment. If that ends up backfiring me in terms of the analytics, I'll just change it up in the future. But since Retro Raw was the first thing at the top of my list here, at least at the beginning of my document page here, we're going to roll with the punches and get that show out of the way first. No cold open for this one. Jumping right in with the show. 24 hours officially removed from the King of the Ring special, wherein at the top of the program, there was zero mention of anything pertaining to the King of the Ring pay-per-view or Owen Hart winning said King of the Ring tournament. It's like watching the Dynamite after a pay-per-view where there's virtually no acknowledgement of it and they just move on like nothing ever happened. I should also note here, before we get into the opening match this week, no Vince McMahon on commentary, as I believe he was currently dealing with the court proceedings regarding the steroid trials that were still ongoing during this period, in case anybody forgot about that. So we had Gorilla Monsoon on play-by-play with the Macho Man, as well as our completely superfluous Spanish commentary team, where no Spanish was spoken, and Carlos Cabrera just kind of stood there and smiled. Excellent. It was good to see Carlos, though. God, he's been around the company for ages. He was doing color commentary with the Spanish team on those WWF pay-per-views in like the mid-2000s. Didn't look a day over 20 here. But they definitely had a rowdy bunch for this one. Hot crowd. They were back in, I think it was Westchester County in New York. And as we head into the opening match for the week, it is Diesel taking on Mark Thomas. And this was where Monsoon and Savage started mentioning the story follow-up from the King of the Ring, covering the fallout to the Bret Diesel title match and all the controversy surrounding Jim Neidhart. My running gag about that title match was it was the title match that nobody ever remembered. Despite it being a relatively solid match, per Kevin Nash standards. And then, of course, you watch him in this match with Mark Thomas, and you realize, yeah, Bret kind of carried that entire match on his back. 'Twas kind of the prototypical Diesel match here, circa 1994, including the infamous 5 moves of doom if you count the hair flip, which at this point was more just a mullet flip. 4 minutes, Nash won with a jackknife. Shawn Michaels was out there playing cheerleader the whole time and trying to hog all the attention. Nothing out of the ordinary from what you'd come to expect out of that egomaniac. Just foreshadowing what was about to come in less than a year, when that guy was a center of attention virtually every week, and it never got any easier to swallow. But all that kind of led into Todd Pettingill's King of the Ring recap. For sake of time, I'm not going to restate everything he talked about here. He just literally glossed over the entire card in pretty short order. You know, we did the full pay-per-view recap last week, so you can go check that one out in your spare time if you want the details. They also plugged the encore presentation for the following Tuesday if people wanted to order the pay-per-view on delay. I will say one thing here, however. Todd was very strategic to make sure he never mentioned Art Donovan one time. Wise move. And again, for anybody wondering who was Art Donovan and what did he have to do with the King of the Ring pay-per-view, again, go watch the recap. Just everything you need to know. That took us to the 1-2-3 Kid versus Nikolai Volkov. And you'll remember the ongoing story with Nikolai on the show right now. He is being forced to pay lip service to Ted DiBiase because of financial difficulties. So, well, the long and short of it is, Nikolai works for Ted now because he needs the money. Which basically means he's a heel. What started as him being apprehensive about working for DiBiase, now a few weeks later, he's just a full-blown bad guy. Trash-talking the fans, using cheap underhanded tactics behind the ref's back. He certainly flipped a switch in pretty quick turnaround. This was certainly a Nikolai Volkov match in 1994. He was not the most agile athlete at this stage of his career, to put it kindly. It was basically one of those extended beatdown matches where Waltman sold for like 90% of it and then won with a flash roll-up at the end. During the heat portion, I watched as Nikolai went for a roundhouse kick on the Kid and barely got like 3 inches off the mat with his foot. And even so, despite the limited mobility, the guy was strong as a bull. He was still hitting those power moves like they were nothing. And, the finish was kind of clever with Waltman pretending to blow out his knee and then catching Nikolai in a small cradle or a small package cradle at the end. I mean, fans pop for that. And of course, he paid the price for it almost immediately. Nikolai beat him up for a minute until, of all people, who should come out to make the save but Virgil? And of course, we all remember the history with him and DiBiase going back a few years. So they tease that confrontation until Nikolai jumps Virgil from behind. And that beatdown ensues until Luger then runs down, and he winds up actually sending the heels powdering. And my final note for the segment reads, Luger makes the save? In all caps. Yeah, I literally had no idea where that came from. It was mildly explained later on in the show, but overall, it was a very weird segment. A lot of moving parts in this puzzle, and it was not easy to follow. The only thing I kept thinking by the end was the downfall of poor Luger continues in the WWF. That run from 93 up to where we are now in the summer of 94, it's literally like watching a cartoon of Daffy Duck tumbling off the side of a mountain. And he just keeps falling and running into shit and smacking off of jagged rocks. And it never ends. That is Lex Luger in a nutshell during this period. Running into brick walls and rocks and just never stopping. Speaking of running into brick walls, it's pretty much what happened with Nick Barbary in this match with Yokozuna. All 600 pounds of him. And, well, beyond the typical Yoko killed a guy and smashed him with his giant ass comments, apparently Yoko was also being set up for another feud that nobody remembers ever happening. Now in the form of Tugboat. Or excuse me, I'll use his Christian name. Typhoon. The other half of the natural disasters. Now that Earthquake is out of the equation, they decided to go dig up the other former half of the duo that sent him at Yokozuna. What hopefully will turn out to be just an ordinary singles match instead of another sumo match. One could only hope. Something tells me that was probably in the works at one point too. Prior to Tenta leaving, I wouldn't have been all that surprised if they tried to reunite the natural disasters to face off with Yokozuna and Crush. The girth in that match alone would have sent Vince into a euphoric orgasm. And then we'd have to watch the match, and I don't know about all that. Speaking of Typhoon, didn't have to wait long to see him confront Yoko. He was scheduled to work a squash next, but not before confronting Yoko in the aisleway and giving him a piece of his mind, in the form of one stiff blow to the jaw, which took place during commercial. Grand. And I love how Gorilla and Savage were trying to hype this up like we just saw the greatest moment of the entire 90s. And then they show the footage and it's Typhoon giving Yoko one punch. Then they cut back to the ring. You'll have to pardon me for not being particularly enthralled at the idea of this feud, but honestly, I was just kind of reading the expression on Typhoon's face. The I really wish I weren't here right now look. Channeling his inner Squidward. He looked totally disinterested the entire time here, working with the Black Phantom, beating him up for a few minutes, and the crowd just sat on their hands. Savage was also trying to find ways to entertain himself on commentary by recognizing that Vince McMahon was not doing play-by-play this week. Good catch. And also doing the regular USA show plugs with a half-shot voice. Yeah. Remember when I was joking about the downfall of Luger? Yokozuna. Let us not remove him from the conversation. His downward trajectory is just as bad as Luger's was. He just lasted longer in the company before being forced out. Man. So, well, at this stage in the show, figuring things could not have possibly bogged down any more to a screeching halt, well, they managed to outdo themselves. A King's Court segment with special guest Duke the Dumpster. My follow-up note reads, "Fuck my life." I'm sure that's what Lawler was thinking the entire time this was going on. Well, first he recapped the Roddy Piper match from the pay-per-view and explained that the reason he lost was because he got distracted by Piper's ugly daughter at ringside. Hence why he was wearing the shades, because she was so hideous, she blinded him whenever he looked over in her general direction. Also using the shades to protect himself against having to look at all the ugly people in the crowd. That was the only redeeming quality about this segment. Lawler being a dick to the New York fans. Then Duke came out. And, to spare you the long-winded details, Lawler made about 40 roundabout jokes about the fact that Duke smells like trash. Because, see the gimmick attached. He made him stand on the floor, so Duke couldn't get in the ring to get a word in edgewise. Couldn't tell if that was strategic on his part or if he was just being a jerk. And finally, Duke had enough of Lawler's trash talking, pun intended, and he tried to walk off until Lawler jumped him from behind and beat the shit out of him with a garbage can. That was it. I basically concluded this entire segment was done so that Lawler could get his heat back after losing to Piper. Really can't think of any other reason this was done. I mean, Lawler's always good at getting heat on himself, but in the context of this particular segment, it was cartoon WWF on every level. Bad pun jokes about Duke the Dumpster Drozy and his dead-in-the-water gimmick. It's the epitome of death television. And then they very quickly got off that subject, coming back from commercial, led into our TV main event for the week. A Heavenly Body squash against Jim Powers and some guy named Russ. Didn't catch the last name. Jim Powers I actually recognized because he was doing some jobs on Nitro in the late 90s. Guy was a pretty decent athlete too. Good shape. He could do some stuff in the ring. I'm surprised he didn't ever go anywhere in the business outside the undercard. I think Teddy Long managed him for a brief period too. Anyway, it was a pretty standard Heavenly Body squash. Cornette was on color and he was sort of the highlight. He talked about the head shrinkers in passing, so I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure out what that's leading to. The Body's run in the WWF is so sporadic around this time. It's hard to ever get into a lot of their stuff because they're only around for short stints and then they disappear for a while and resurge later on. Their matches are hit and miss a lot of the time. I don't know. It's like they try to do all this overly complex shit that none of the job guys know how to feed for. So a lot of it looks awkward because they don't really know how to properly take bumps. Especially with a lot of the double team moves. I don't know. I always thought Jimmy Del Rey and Tom Pritchard were just kind of a clash in the WWF. They just really didn't fit the style of wrestling. I never really understood why they were around. I mean, they were good wrestlers, good talents, nothing against them, but just they were always an odd fit in the WWF. I don't ever think it worked, especially for that fan base too. But yeah, the Bodies won with Del Rey hitting a moonsault press. Kind of. Looked semi-botched. At which point we come back from break, where Gorilla Monsoon is at the desk with Savage, essentially doing damage control for the Jerry Lawler segment, saying they don't condone his actions by what he did to Duke the Dumpster. For those that already forgot, he attacked him with a gimmick trash can. And Gorilla said that we will never see anything like that air on WWF again. To which I laughed at uproariously. If only Monsoon could project how things would go several years from now. And, it was a very odd segment in general. Almost like that Lawler attack was spontaneous and wasn't supposed to happen. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but again, it was just weird. That's all I can say. Not as weird as their incredibly awkward SummerSlam 94 infomercial. That was a sight to behold. And then with about 30 seconds left of airtime, we get Ted DiBiase in a pre-tape talking about how he was interested in acquiring the services of Lex Luger, which is where things kind of tied back to that segment earlier where Luger ran out and made the save for Virgil and the 1-2-3 Kid. DiBiase wants to manage Luger. All right then. It's a strange way of getting to that point, but sure, why not? Gives Luger something to do on television while he bumbles his way through the rest of his contract. You know, I think the main takeaway from the show centers around downward spirals. Boy, is that apropos. It's all a downward spiral. From the overall presentation of the show to the stories and feuds being perpetrated on it. 24 hours removed from the King of the Ring pay-per-view, Owen Hart, nowhere to be seen on the show. Brett was absent yet again, the WWF champion for the record. And the only major story development was with whatever the fuck is going on in this $1 Million Corporation storyline that still hasn't really been properly explained. It's a fucking mess, bro. This show is a total fiasco right now. And it just keeps getting worse and worse as time goes on. The star power is lacking. There's no hot program going on right now. Even with the Owen and Brett stuff. And on top of that, you got Vince dealing with the steroid scandal hearings. So he's not even on the program for a period of time while that's going on. Man, oh man. It's amazing to think this company survived. It survived all right. Just like SmackDown's currently surviving right about now. It's on life support. But it's still kicking. And the only thing carrying it right about now is the Bloodline. Or at least it was up until the end of this show. We're still coming off the heels of last week where we were intended to find out where Jey Uso lined up in his relationship with Roman. Is he in? Is he out of the Bloodline? What's the status of everything going on with Jimmy? We didn't really get any definitive answers. It was kind of a bait and switch. We've been left in the dark for 7 days after Jey lost his U.S. title match with Austin Theory. The whole controversy surrounding Jimmy accidentally super kicking Jey, even though the intended target was Solo. That was where they left us off at the top of the program this week. Oh, and Kayla Braxton, the most ineffectual interviewer in the history of mankind. Just wanted to point that out. So yeah, there's the Bloodline stuff. And then there's everything else on the show, which, well, I was half tempted to just put up a giant screen cap that read, Void Filler, because that's pretty much what the remaining hour and 45 minutes was. A bunch of matches and segments that were just on the show. They were there. Not really doing a lot to pique my interest. Take, for example, the opening match this week. A number one contenders multi-man gauntlet match to determine the challengers for Sami and KO's tag belts. Belts that I thought were now exclusive to Raw, considering Sami and Owens were drafted to Raw a couple months back. You know, the brand split. Guess we're already forgetting about that. And among the teams involved in this, basically grasping at straws and trying to find two bodies with a pulse, it's the Street Profits versus the Brawling Brutes versus the Bald Egg Jobbers versus Shit Row versus the Suspect Sissies in Crop Tops versus the Legato Lackeys in the refurbished LWO group. In other words, the same group of motherfuckers we've seen on the show every week for the last month. In the case of some teams involved here, more like 8 months. And out of the 6 teams involved here, the only 2 teams that got entrances were the Street Profits and the Brutes. The rest of the teams were just casually hanging out at ringside like a bunch of random job guys. So it's not even like they could rely on surprise entrances to hook people's attention. They just said, here's everybody involved. And they're all just going to stand out at ringside playing with their junk until the next team gets eliminated. It's pretty much what they did. Standing out there with dick in hand. I did find it funny how, even with the remaining teams at ringside waiting for their cue to come in, they still had to play entrance music for all of 2 seconds. Classic. The best of which was Shit Row's entrance, where Flop Dollar and Ashante hit the ring. Ashante immediately gets dumped over the top rope out to the floor, and Flop Dollar immediately eats a bro kick from Sheamus. Just like that, out of the match. They're gone. And for the record, I know Cornette uses Flop Dollar all the time, but since he doesn't have it trademarked, and Michael Cole blatantly used it here to mock him, I'm rolling with it. The humiliation streak continues with those 2 juggernauts. It is both sadistically humorous and kind of sad at the same time. Like, at one point, I would have just wondered to myself, why are they even bothering to pay these guys? If we've just accepted the fact that Hit Row are a complete waste of time and money, why are they around? And then the more I think of it, WWE has fuck you money for decades. Spare no expense. If the end goal is to let everybody know that these guys suck and they're rotten beyond all hope, by all means, keep the burial treatment coming, brother. The more we see of Top Dollar getting punked out every week, the more laughs to go around. At least it'll give me something to look forward to from week to week. So anyway, that match took up the entire first half hour. And to make matters worse, after the Brutes run the entire gauntlet and eliminate every single team, in pretty convincing fashion, I should add, of course the finish is them losing to the Suspect Sissies, which I think we all saw coming. So now we're going to be subjected to the Crop Top Cretins having to work a title match with Sami and Owens. I'm sure Owens is peeing himself with excitement as we speak of. Oh, wow. I get to wrestle 2 effeminate soy boys on the next live special? Count me in. Looking forward to it. Glad I re-signed for that multi-million-dollar contract. And then after the totally meaningless promo exchange between the 2 teams that followed, we cut back to the Bloodline in the locker room where Roman just looks totally disgusted and beside himself. He probably saw the match and was trying to hold back his gag reflexes. I don't blame him. Nah, mainly he was there to tell Paul Heyman to go hunt down Jey Uso. So I guess he went off to catering. Not that I'm insinuating that Jey would have been in catering, but I just kind of figured that would have been the first place Paulie would think to look. And then we come back to the ring for our next match. Now you recall, after last week's Blue Brand edition of Shimmer Wrestling, I was kind of in need of a women's wrestling detox. So, naturally, as that thought crosses my mind, what should the next match be but a girls' match? Of course. It's Io Sky versus Zelina Vega. Probably one of the rare situations in Zelina's career where she's in the ring wrestling a girl that doesn't tower over her by about 8 inches. I mean, Io probably still had like an inch or 2 on her, but wasn't like watching Zelina try to work a competitive match with Rhea, where the visual is just so ridiculous and implausible. Anyway, they're doing the split tees with Damage Control. In all caps, I wrote, "Thank the frick God." So they laid out the match to where Io took like 90% of it until Bayley tried to run interference on her behalf. And it backfired after Io yelled at Bayley through the ropes for almost half a century. And then Zelina just hit her with a 619 and pinned her. The only other thing I noted here was that it's hard to imagine that this is what they had in mind after Io and Bianca tore the house down in that title match in Puerto Rico. Or wherever that match was. I don't think it was Saudi Arabia. I think it was Puerto Rico. The pay-per-view where Io was like the biggest babyface on the planet. Here we are a couple months later. She's now jobbing out in 3-minute TV matches to underneath girls via slip-on-a-banana-peel finishes. That's WWE booking in a nutshell for you. Anyway, here we go. I was wondering when we were going to get to review another one of these again. Lord knows the last time they booked one of these segments, it resulted in utter catastrophe. Time for another Grayson Waller experience. And it's always an experience. You never know what's going to happen. Whether it's 2-minute awkward promo exchanges with him and AJ, or 5 minutes of Japanese girls ranting back and forth at each other like a bunch of wild banshees. You know, the more I think about it, it's starting to become a guilty pleasure of mine. Just because I never know what to expect. These segments are train wreck level horrible on every level. Unfortunately, he brought his guest out for this week, and it did not give me any signs of hope or promise. Here comes Charlotte, wearing one of the most god-ugly outfits I've ever seen in my life. Looked like she was ready to go pole dancing with some friends. I can't even begin to describe this fucking outfit. It's like if you gave a toddler a paintbrush and a canvas, and instead of the kid using the brush, he just swallowed like 10 cans of paint and then puked it all up. God almighty. I've seen third-grade art projects that look more striking than that outfit. So yeah, Charlotte was out there to say some words, and in typical dry Charlotte delivery, the voice that would keep insomniacs up at night, she basically talks about ending Asuka's undefeated streak at WrestleMania years back and how she has her number. And then her and Grayson just kind of sat there awkwardly for another 30 seconds while they were waiting to cue up Bianca's music. And here comes Bianca, with the hair twirling and the booty shaking and the hip thrusting and all the gesticulating. Keep in mind, she's supposed to be pissed off in kayfabe because Adam Pearce is currently jerking her around right now without giving her a chance to go after the belt, all because of Charlotte's overinflated ego hogging the spotlight. So by all accounts, she should be pretty angry. So, of course, she comes down skipping and dancing and acting all girly. Because that's what WWE women are trained to do, no matter what the circumstances. Run over their dog in the parking lot, skipping down the aisleway and smiling. So anyway, she finally confronts Charlotte and tells her off. Said she doesn't appreciate being looked over when she still owed a title rematch. And I don't know. They did this weird roundabout way of basically letting us know that Charlotte is still getting the title match with Asuka, but I guess Bianca is going to be watching at ringside or something, waiting to call her shot. I mean, okay. I'm starting to see some warning bells and red flags flashing right about now. Call me a conspiracy theorist, but Bianca claiming that she's going to be hanging out at ringside during a sanctioned title match with Asuka and Charlotte? Are we just assuming that she's going to sit front row and not contribute in any way? Are we just immediately thinking fucked finish. I mean, they're not even trying to withhold from telegraphing that one. But hey, you know what? I won't complain. Because if the end result is to turn Bianca heel and have her fuck over Charlotte, even though I've constantly said that Charlotte's one of the worst baby faces in the history of mankind because she's one of the most insufferable people in the world, I've said for a while, Bianca's needed some kind of change up in her persona. A heel turn might not be a bad way to go. So I'm all for Bianca screwing over Charlotte. As long as it keeps the belt away from her longer, good. You know, Asuka can go pursue Io or something like that, and Charlotte can go fuck right off with her 15th title reign or whatever number they're edging closer to. I mean, that's what I got out of it. Grayson Waller was completely superfluous. I have no idea why he was even there. I mean, the jury's still out on whether or not the guy can wrestle. Are we ever going to find out? Guess we'll have to wait another 8 months before they finally book him in a match with boring Corbin. In the meantime, well, we can finally confirm Jey Uso, not in catering. He was just kind of casually hanging out in the back somewhere. And Heyman wanted to reassure to him that Jimmy is the bad guy in all this bloodline drama. And of course, Jay's still not buying it. And he's actually doing a real solid job in getting under Heyman's skin. I don't even know what you call this form of mindfuckery he's playing with Heyman, but it is kind of unique. It's like his form of 4D chess. Like Heyman's trying to be the lying, manipulative weasel, and Jay's not buying it. He's throwing it right back in his face, telling him that if Jay's still in the bloodline, Heyman's out. And they just sort of stare at each other without budging a muscle, and Jay just smiles. Because he's got a plan. And it's definitely leaving us on our toes, patiently waiting to see whether or not Jay's going to blow up or not. Good stuff. Very good stuff. You know what's not good stuff? More of this 50-50 booking with the girls and guys segments. I'm starting to think they might have changed up a policy or something in the last couple weeks because, God, this is starting to get ridiculous. I mean, they already have way too much girls wrestling going on with WWE anyway, but man, oh man, it's just starting to get insufferable. They already shot the girls match earlier on this show. Then they followed it with like 2 more girls segments in the back. I didn't even cover those. Then we had the Charlotte-Bianca face-off. Now here we are less than 5 minutes later. We go to a mixed tag match with AJ and Michin versus Karrion Kross and Scarlett. First of all, can anybody even ever recall the last time they've ever seen Scarlett wrestle, period? Now they're just randomly throwing her out there to wrestle here on SmackDown with no rhyme or reason. And of course, it's a mixed tag. So these are always stupid because the common thread with all of them is the guys have to wrestle the guys, the girls have to wrestle the girls, but the girls can still do shit to the guys, but not vice versa. Because that would be considered male-on-female violence. The Lord knows we can't have any of that in this equity for all world we live in. Not that I'm advocating to see men smash the shit out of women in wrestling. I'm not. But the double standard is pretty eye-opening. And above all else, it's not even like the girls are doing believable-looking shit to the guys. Like kicking them in the balls when the ref's not looking, or gouging their eyes. Something believable. In this case, it's Mia hitting Kross with a DDT after they take like 20 seconds to set everything up, and Kross just has to stand there and cooperate while Mia gets ready to put him in position. It wasn't like indie level ridiculous where I've seen guys let the girls do all kinds of power moves and absurd shit that would never happen in a real fight. I mean, this match wasn't even long enough for it to be that offensive. Went like 4 minutes. They did a spot where Scarlett tried to hit on AJ. That went about as well as you would expect for a good Christian man. Pulls off his glove and then shows the wedding ring and goes, "I'm married, bitch." But of course, that was all a distraction, so Cross could take advantage and choke out AJ. Also, he could then set him up for some kind of modified pump handle F5 combo. I mean, hey, small favors where you can find them. Cross won a match. It's the LA Knight logic of booking, where you just accept the fact that the dude actually won a match for a change. And you take the win while you can. It's kind of where I am with Cross at this point. It's so unfortunate what they've done with this guy, man. Whatever mystique he had back in NXT a few years ago, it's gone. And it sucks. I actually kind of gained a newfound respect for him in a clip that I just saw of him recently. I think he was doing like a workout or a training session with Chris Van Vliet. And he was doing a really accurate Jesse the Body Ventura impression. It was like scary good too. Hilarious. "Come on, Chris. I was doing tricep extensions in the Gulf of Tongan. Where were you, Chris? Where were you? I was doing barbell presses under the Atlantic Ocean. Just breathing underwater. Some people say that it wasn't possible. I'm just asking questions." It just makes you realize the guy's clearly got something. He's got personality. He's very talented. He's a well-spoken dude. You ever hear the guy cut a promo? I mean, he can talk. But you just see what they've done with him from a creative standpoint, and you're like, what the fuck are they doing with him? I mean, even this match wasn't a particularly good showcase for Cross. The fact that he's bumping around for a girl half his size, that shit's never going to get over. And this feud with AJ is just sort of another placeholder thing for him to do. I don't know. Maybe it'll grow on me. Maybe I just need to watch him do more Jesse the Body impressions and I'll be on board with him. So what else happened on this show? Oh, Cameron Grimes got jumped by Baron Corbin. That was fun. Then we had Rey Mysterio come out to talk about how one of his greatest career accomplishments was reforming the LWO. Not kidding. That was the thing he said. On par with him becoming world champion once upon a time. On par with winning the Royal Rumble. On par with all the great legendary standout moments of his career. All of that is on the same level as reforming an underneath comedy faction during the dying days of Nitro. Good. I'm glad. Then we had Santos Escobar come down and do one of the most forced, artificially contrived white meat babyface promos of all time. It was just cringe enough to make you want to punch him in the face. Thankfully, LA Knight interrupted and brought some level of sanity to it. Unfortunately, he didn't get to cut a promo this week. Instead, he just came down and shoved Ray to the ground like the bully on the school playground. And that sort of segued right into an oddly convenient one-on-one match with Knight and Escobar, which apparently they booked well in advance. Totally not something arbitrary that just kind of happened spur of the moment. And, well, naturally, as you'd come to expect, LA Knight, the heel, massively over with the fans, Escobar tried every babyface move in the book. The fans booed just about everything he did. They wrestled for a few minutes until LA Knight tried to use the rope grab spot again, kind of like how he beat the Street Profit in that qualifying match last week. So, of course, 1 week later, they gave him a TV win. So they turn it right around and give Escobar the win. Beats LA Knight via roll-through. So much for that win streak. You could even read the expression on Knight after the whole thing was over. He had that boo-boo job face on. This time it was warranted. He knew the bullshit sandwich he was being fed here. Didn't even try to hide it. Fucking absurd. That guy better win Money in the Bank, or that entire venue's going to go up in flames. You think the people are hostile now? Just you try and have somebody other than LA Knight win that briefcase. Let me know how that goes for you. Then jerking the people around with that guy for months. Anyway, we ready to talk about the only thing that mattered on this stupid show? I'm ready to. Bloodline soap opera. Better than a Lifetime movie. You never know what kinds of twists and turns you're going to get on this thing. So they set it up throughout the entire show. Will Jay's loyalty stand with the Bloodline, or will he be walking out on his own? Well, we got our answer. It was a very long, tedious way of getting there. But I can't say the swerve didn't work. It definitely got the right reaction. I still wonder if it would have been even more of an electric reaction in front of a crowd that wasn't half asleep for the entire night. I'll elaborate more in a minute. So, yeah, Roman, Solo, and Heyman coming out. And before they can really get going, here comes Jay, wasting no time, jumping in feet first, right into the lion's den. And Roman's asking where Jay stands. Jay sort of thinks it over for a minute before telling Roman that he'll leave the ball in his court. Either he goes, or the wise man goes. And of course, Roman's trying to smooth talk everything over, talking to Jay, making him realize that when Jay becomes the new tribal chief, he can appoint anybody he wants to be the front man. Or the wise man, as Roman calls it. But right now, he's still calling the shots. Therefore, Heyman will remain in the group. And, by the way, I should mention that the crowd was whatting the fuck out of Roman here. To the point where it was kind of distracting. So if I missed a detail or two, I apologize. I thought those chants had sort of subsided in the last few years, but Steve Austin forever poisoned the landscape of the wrestling fan base as we know it. In any case, things picked up once Jimmy came down. Now we've reached the point where they got Jay hooked up in the middle of this tug-of-war rope. Roman's trying to pull him back in. Jimmy's trying to pull him to the other side and get him to recognize that Roman's done nothing but blow smoke up his ass for months now. And here's where things kind of turn around. Now, up to this point, it's been fairly unmemorable and not all that interesting. They've been talking at this point for what seemingly feels like hours, yet not a single thing of substance had probably been said up to that point. But finally, Roman starts talking about how he brought the Usos to the Promised Land. First time in 10 years that people actually started giving a shit about them. Which is a harsh reality, but not entirely untrue. And it finally boils over to where Roman reminds Jay of the one guy in the bloodline who opposed the idea of Jay becoming the right-hand man, the next heir to the throne as the tribal chief. It was his jealous brother, Jimmy. And the heels do that long, overdramatic stare at Jimmy, which is just fantastic. And that obviously hits home wrong with Jay, so he gets confrontational with Jimmy and starts talking about how he was always the bigger brother, looking out for Jay's best interest, never letting him make his own decisions, telling him what he ought to do what he's told, stay out of trouble, blah, blah. And when it finally looks like Jay's made his decision, that he's ready to finally do things his own way and not attach himself to the hip of his older brother, he goes, well, guess what? You're out. And so am I. And he turns around and wham! Down goes Roman with the super kick. Like a deck of cards, just teeters over and falls flat on his back. And of course, Heyman shitting himself. Solo looks on completely mesmerized, and he eats a series of kicks as well for his troubles. Again, easily the biggest pop of the night for that Roman kick. It's like a giant alarm clock went off in the building that woke people up. They said, oh, well, boring promo. They're saying some words. And oh my God, Jay just kicked Roman's head off. And they all went ballistic for it. Again, I believe it probably would have sounded about twice that decibel level if they were actually in a building where the fans weren't walking, breathing zombies for an entire 2 hours. But hey, they threw the Kentucky fans a bone for a change. Gave them something memorable that they can all remember for decades. The night the Usos turned their backs on Cousin Roman. And the Bloodline, for that matter. And of course, they had that great finish to the show where Roman's flipping his lid. He's pounding the ring mat, throwing a huge tantrum. And right as he gets up to try and confront the Usos, bam! He eats another double super kick. And he falls back in dead man's position as the camera fades to black. Awesome camera shot. It almost made the entire slog worth the wait. Just for that one moment at the very end. With Roman laying dead on his back while the Usos walk out together as a tag team. And you can kind of see where that's going as they get closer to Money in the Bank. I don't know. I mean, I like the idea of the match. I personally think it would probably be better saved to do as like a major attraction feature for SummerSlam. But, I don't know, maybe they got something bigger in store for Roman at SummerSlam. Not sure what exactly. But, yeah, they got a major selling point for Money in the Bank. If it's the Usos versus Roman and Solo, that could be a great showdown. One of the few times I'll ever be interested in seeing an Usos match. I mean, the one in Mania with Sami and Owens was the last one I remember being invested in. What happens after the fact? I don't really know. But this was definitely a needle mover in the Bloodline story. And it needed to happen. The story arc called for this. They were just kind of delaying the inevitable at this point. We all kind of knew this was coming at one point or another, so they made the move. It got over. Fine. Good. Now we can just wait and see what happens with Solo as time progresses. And Heyman, for that matter. He'll probably factor into the equation as well. Again, the final 2 minutes of the show was the only redeeming quality. The pre-tapes with the Bloodline throughout the night were just kind of there for theater. Not really doing much in the way of harm, just sort of keeping you hooked for the final segment. The rest of the show ranged anywhere in the ballpark from torture to painstakingly boring. Still way too much girls wrestling, although the wrestling aspect of it was toned down a little bit this week. But I'm telling you, man, there's way too much 50-50 booking going on right now with how they're divvying up these men's and women's segments. Maybe I'm just the only one realizing it, but it's just kind of tuning me out of the show. I'm just hanging my hat on a lot of the Bloodline saga. And now that we basically closed the chapter on the Usos part, the fact that they've officially ousted themselves from the group, how much mileage is even left, given the current state. I mean, Solo's the next guy in line to leave. I just wonder how long they plan on prolonging that. Are they really going to go all the way till Mania next year? Can they hold it off that long? I don't really know. We'll see, but yeah, mostly a thumbs down show. Save the super kick of doom to Roman that I gave 5 stars. 6 if it would have taken place in the Tokyo Dome. And on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we had Collision. And boy, was it quite the show. I thought long and hard about how I wanted to break this show down. Do I treat it like a standard Dynamite report? Do I just sort of address the highs and lows and kind of jump around with the card? It's one of those things where it was a mixed bag for me. The highs of the show were really positive, and the lows, well, definitely mild compared to what we're used to seeing on the Wednesday shows. They were still there, and while a lot of that didn't really resonate or jump out on screen immediately, I think some of my qualms more so have to do with some of the long-term sustainability where I might have some drawbacks. I'll talk about my major gripe later on once we sort of unpack everything. There's still some lingering concerns I might have about this show as we see time progress. It's the newest toy out of the box right now, and while they've got a huge gold mine at the helm, it doesn't mean the show's all sunshine and rainbows. But I'll say this from the jump. Since the show was mostly built around one thing, name power, and we got it. We got it in the form of CM Punk. And, you know, while that's always going to be a bitter pill to swallow for a lot of people out there, let's be blunt about it, folks. We haven't seen a whole lot of star power on this AEW programming in well over half a year. Whatever cult fan base the Elite have been appealing to on the other channel for the better part of 8 or 9 months, it ain't for me. I'll tell you that much. And judging by the ratings, it's probably not for a lot of people either. The star power's been lacking for a long time now. The people on that Dynamite show that think they're over, that think they're stars, again, the ratings haven't been reflecting that. Most of those bumfucks aren't draws, and we all know it. CM Punk is a star. CM Punk is a draw. Whether you love him or you hate him, you can't deny that when he's in the room, he commands attention. Even the most die-hard Punk hater knows that when Punk is on camera, people will pay attention. Which is why I was absolutely on board with the way they started the show. Much like with what they did on the Rampage debut a couple years ago, you had to start the show with Punk. They were in Chicago. People were chanting his name from the beginning. You couldn't start with anybody else. Even though he was still scheduled to wrestle in the main event, he was also advertised to come out and do a promo. And doing that right at the top of the program, fresh out of the gate, it's exactly what needed to happen. And I'll say, he covered a lot of ground. Much like the Rampage debut, though, he left a lot of things open-ended, which isn't entirely a problem. You know, he's got the laced boots wrapped around his neck. He's carrying the sash in hand, what's obviously the AEW World Championship. Although he methodically kept that concealed for the entire show, and we never saw the actual reveal of the belt. So he's obviously going to keep that one lingering over us for a while until he's ready to cash in his chips. And that's good. Gives us something to hold on to for however long he decides to prolong it. And the promo here was good. You know, Punk's got a natural way of talking and his ability to hook people in from the beginning. He's always been a very captivating promo. even if the material isn't always a home run. Basically just comes out and says that he was away with an injury for a while, but he's tired of playing nice with everyone. From now on, the AEW Collision show is going to be the professional wrestling product. I'm going to put an asterisk next to that for a second because I'm going to come back to that talking point later. But he also reverted back to that classic phrase, "Tell me when I'm telling lies." And that's what this entire promo was based on. He's going over the fact that he's made a career out of speaking truths and being himself. And he's not about to compromise on his morals now just because a bunch of soy boy pansies got all bent out of shape that he became a bigger star than they could ever hope to be. Translation, fuck the elite, which was a chant they got going. I'm sure they got their panties in a bunch over that. Who are we kidding? Highly doubt those idiots were even watching. Probably too busy playing video games or something. Or beating off each other. I believe his phrase was, "He's the one true Bill surrounded by a bunch of counterfeit bucks." Which is a fucking moneymaker line. Print that shit on a t-shirt. It'll sell like popcorn. And he had a great line in here where he's calling out the cultist elite fans, saying that he's been told an apology would probably be the best thing to do. So here it goes. He's sorry that the only wrestlers softer than they are the ones they happen to like. Again, he ain't telling lies. If you've seen the average elite fan, they're not what you'd call the alpha male. And until the day comes where somebody can come out and lace Punk's boots, he's going to continue to do what he does best. And again, he referenced the red satchel thing. Obviously, his version of the AEW world title is in there, so I'm sure he'll be bringing that up again in weeks to come. No mention of MJF outright, although the dog collar match came up in passing. And, again, this was good. Didn't overstay its welcome. Punk got in, said what he needed to, and got out. The one thing Punk has mastered in the promo world is being able to make his point without going too long. You know, even MJF is still trying to figure that out, as good as he is on the mic. But again, this is always going to be one of those things where, depending on your viewpoint of Punk, you either soak it up like a wet sponge or you scoff at the idea of it and you go back to jacking off to Beta Bucks trampoline matches on the other station. It's always going to be 50-50. And that's always going to be the unfortunate matter of how we've gone to this point with AEW. Which, again, I'll touch on once we get to the end of the Collision report. And while we're on the subject of Punk, why don't we just go ahead and talk about this main event? The advertised six-man, Juicy Fruit, Jay White, and Samoa Joe versus FTR and CM Punk. They gave this match a lot of time, and considering the names involved, that was perfectly all right. You'll remember me saying before, at the time they announced this match on Dynamite a week or so back, I wasn't the most enthused about it. I thought it seemed kind of rushed into with very little forethought or planning. I get the idea was to eventually build the Joe versus Punk, but to just immediately launch into it without any preceding promos or angles, that always seemed kind of odd. If the idea is, let's do this six-man tag as part of an overarching story, this was like week 2 or week 3 of that story. Instead they just did it all in week 1 before ever really establishing any kind of beef with anybody. Now, FTR, Juice, and Jay, they've kind of had an established feud going on after the pay-per-view where they had that random jump attack in the back with Ricky, and FTR was just kind of hanging around on standby waiting to make the save. In any case, we got the match. Kind of figured going in with the guys involved, we were definitely going to be looking at something quality enough on paper. And overall, I think it delivered. I think the one glaring issue you're going to hear people bring up is the fact that there was very little involvement from Punk here throughout the match. Even though he was in there doing stuff, the bulk of the action for the team was carried by FTR, and I don't think that's a bad thing exactly. The ring rust is natural when you've been gone for a long stretch of time. If they were going to do the six-man, this is probably the best case scenario. Let Punk warm up to things, get his feet wet again, and not risk injury by doing more shit than absolutely necessary. He got the pops in the right spots. He hit the big moves in the right places. In terms of the work with FTR, they had some good moments as a trio. I mean, the thing you have to keep in mind with Punk is the guy doesn't have to do a whole lot to stay over. Again, he's a star, and the people recognize that. He doesn't have to go out there and do cartwheels and backflips to get the people to care about his matches. All he has to do is just be a presence. In the fluidity of the match from beginning to end, I think it worked well. Again, yes, it was a long match, but they took their time with pacing. Long stretches where the heels were milking heat reactions. The earlier stages where the babyfaces were running wild, most of that looked good. The people went ballistic for the Joe Punk face-off. That was to be expected. Again, the heat portion of the match where they had Cash isolated, that worked well, I think. Even with the match going through 2 commercial breaks, again, they're not trying to go a million miles an hour. They're actually building to spots, building to important moments, building to hot tags. Punk being the one to get the big flurry of offense toward the end, I would say he was hitting on all strides. The body slams looked good. The side drop kick he always does look good. He was never out of position or confused about where he was supposed to be next. And they try to keep people on their toes with letting the heels cut off the faces toward the finish, trying to rally people behind Punk and FTR that much more. Again, it all worked. I will say, though, not to make light of anything involved here, there was one incredibly stupid part in this match. Happened within the last couple minutes. If you watch the match, you might remember it, but once you see the visual, you'll never forget it. Okay, Joe's got Punk in the Coquina clutch, and they're milking the drama by having Jay and Juice cut off FTR when they try to run in to make the save. Joe has Punk down on the ground. Finally, Cash is able to break free and give Juice a DDT on the floor. So naturally, Cash gets in the ring. Has all the space in the world to run right at Joe to help break up the hold. So does he run at Joe? No, of course he doesn't. He runs past Samoa Joe and Punk while the chokehold is still on so that he could run and break up Jay's chokehold on Dax. And then it is Dax that has to run over to make the save for Punk. I'm like, you fucking idiot. Why would you run past the legal guy that is currently being choked out in the middle of the ring with a submission hold so that you can save your tag partner, who, mind you, is not the legal guy? God, that was incredibly dumb. I'd have fined Cash half his pay cut for that spot. With all that said, they had FTR eventually hit Juice with the big rig. He immediately sprung back up to his feet so Punk could hit him with the GTS. 1, 2, 3. Crowd blew the roof off the arena. It was the perfect ending to the show. Babyfaces over clean. No heat attacks. No afterbirths. No one trying to run in to ram a wrench up the other guy's asshole or bleeding profusely for no reason. It's almost kind of refreshing to just see a normal close to an AEW show. We see it so rarely. It's nothing flashy, but that's perfectly all right. Because you know what? The people cared. Sometimes it's good to just go back to the basics. And KISS. Keep it stupid simple. And that's what I enjoyed about most of the show. It was easy. It was simple. Shit happened. And I wasn't writing copious amounts of notes going, why is this happening? Or who is this guy running in? There was ebb and flow. And again, the visual at the end with Punk and FTR standing there celebrating in the ring, what we're led to believe are going to be the poster boys for the Saturday show going forward. Perfect way to go out. All of the Punk stuff on the show was very well done. He was the centerpiece. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that he overshadowed everything else that happened on the program. Because there was a lot of other positive stuff to take away from this one. Even the TNT title match with Luchasaurus and Wardlow. Gotta give credit where it's due. This was fine. It wasn't a blowaway match or anything that's going to win match of the year. But I was expecting way worse than what we got. And that probably came with a little bit of help from the veterans in the locker room. I mean, you could tell where Punk had some influence in giving both guys some pointers in the layout of this match. Maybe Christian had some input too. But they timed their spots. They actually built to and set up things instead of rushing into everything haphazardly. They didn't immediately start at 100 miles an hour and thwart any room for growth. It wasn't the cleanest match in the world, and that's to be expected with two big lumbering green guys. But it's probably one of the better matches either guy's had in God knows how long. Certainly one of the better matches I've seen the Dinosaur have. I still think the Wardlow-Christian feud's been botched all to hell. The title switch at the end was a little surprising, but I'm not entirely opposed to it if I'm being honest. And I love that post-match celebration where Christian runs in like a chicken shit and just grabs the belt from Rick Knox, and he's posing and celebrating with it like a Weasley snob, like he just did all the work by himself. God, that was so awesome. I laughed so hard at that. And that has to be one of the ongoing stories with Christian and the Dinosaur on TV now. Every segment, every promo, every angle, we need to have Christian holding that TNT title while pretending like he's the champion. Just being an annoying dirtbag during every promo. And you can just have Luchasaurus standing in the background. I hope that's what they have planned. It's almost too perfect with how it was being set up here. That was my favorite part of the whole segment. Again, we could break down the particulars and nitpick any of the sloppy spots. In the overall scope of things, there wasn't anything visually insulting that stood out to me here. And that's why I was okay with it. The booking of Wardlow never ceases to baffle me in this company. I mean, that guy's been jerked around for the last year. And he wins the TNT belt. I think it was from Joe, right? Then he loses it to Hobbs. Then he wins it back from Hobbs. And I think what was Hobbs' first title defense. And now Wardlow loses it again. This time to Christian's bodyguard flunky via worked camera shot. I don't know. I mean, I've been trying to uncover the Wardlow Rosetta Stone for well over a year now. I'm still yet to make any real progress. It continues to be a mystery. But with any luck, if Wardlow's going to be a mainstay on Collision now, my hope is that some of those booking quirks get resolved in the coming months. But again, even for a title match that I had zero expectations for going in, the segment was all right. Pretty good stuff. And that trend continued right with the next match. Buddy Murphy Matthews versus Andrade El Idolo. This was good too. Really good, in fact. Makes you realize how much I've been missing out with Buddy as a singles guy on the Dynamite program. Although by the end of this thing, I'm not sure if we're going to be craving any Buddy Matthews matches in the next 6 to 8 months. By the way, was it a Freudian slip? Or are they calling him Buddy Murphy now? Because the ring announcer called him Buddy Murphy, but the announcers were calling him Buddy Matthews. I'm pretty sure it's still Buddy Matthews because I think WWE trademarked the Murphy name. I don't know. Doesn't matter. This is obviously more centered around Andrade's return. One of many other returns on this show. In the land of misfit toys. He came back in good shape. And he didn't look like he missed a beat with what he was capable of doing in the ring. I've never said Andrade couldn't work. The problem has always been with his personality. Or lack of said personality. And the amount of flip-flopping they've done with him in terms of managers and feuds in the last couple years, it's enough to leave your head spinning. But again, if we're going by the assumption that this is going to be their chance to rectify all that previous bad booking, I'll definitely stay posted for his ongoing TV segments. As a match, I thought these guys worked pretty well together. Again, nothing visually insulting. They wrestled each other. They worked body parts. They didn't do 14,000 meaningless cartwheels and flips for no discernible reason. There was a cartwheel into a backflip off the ring apron before the commercial pitch, but at least it actually meant something and it wasn't just a random spot in the match for no reason like we're all used to seeing. You know, the announcers... Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention this. My God! The commentary on this show was such a breath of fresh air, man. Kevin Kelly and Nigel McGuinness. I hope that's the designated commentary team every week. Please. Anything so I don't have to listen to that masked freak Excalibur and Taz and Shivanto jerking themselves off on color every week. I've always said, I've never been the biggest Kevin Kelly guy in the world, but just to have a normal, sane play-by-play guy that sounds like a human being and doesn't make me want to punch a hole through the goddamn TV, thank God. I'll take it. Nigel's great too. I've never had an issue with him. I've always enjoyed Nigel as a color guy. He did color for NXT, right? It wasn't that long ago. But I've always enjoyed his work. Even when he was wrestling, I always thought the guy was really good. But they were phenomenal on this show. You know, selling us in the story where Andrade came back from a pec tear, talking about the gravity of the situation when Buddy was working that over. You know, and then vice versa. Andrade working over Buddy's knee at one point. Again, it's wrestling. Working injuries, milking tension, drama. The things that are so basic and fundamental to this fucking sport. They actually spent time talking about it. And again, the guys worked hard here. Looked like two grown athletes trying to have a legit contest. Wasn't 15 minutes of tumbling routines. Jesus Christ, it's almost like we're supposed to be watching a wrestling show or something. The only thing I really could complain about the match was all the stuff that happened on the floor. And again, this is a common recurring problem for every AEW match. Too much floor brawling. To the point where it just winds up burying the officials because they're outside the ring for well over what should be full 10 counts. At some point, this company is going to have to decide whether or not they want to regulate countouts or not. If they just do away and eliminate with the countout rules, fine. Then I can stop bitching about it. But until we get confirmation, I'm going to keep bringing it up. Because it's irritating. By far, highlight of the entire segment, Julia Hart. God, I forgot how fucking great she was. And she literally didn't do anything. She just stood there and looked hot. That's the genius of it. All she has to do is literally stand there with the goth girl look. And all the horny guys can droll and fap off to it. And holy cow, wouldn't you know it? All of a sudden she turns into AEW's Sunny. Minus the goth aspect of things. You know, Andrade winning wasn't entirely surprising. It's what needed to happen. So I'm good with it. But let me say this too about Buddy. Whether the leg injury was a work or not, if it is legit, that sucks. I mean, he was definitely selling it like it was a shoot, even in the afterbirth. But that guy needs a singles push. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but he's jacked, he's tan, he looks badass, his shit looks good. They ought to be removing him from the House of Drek and giving him a run on his own. Because they could do something with him. With Julia as the side piece? Good Lord, as a heel duo? Can you imagine how awesome that would be? I don't know if Buddy can talk, which might be the problem. Julia, too. I mean, I've heard her speak a couple times, but that usually comes with the caveat of Malachi Black's artistic directory. Can she actually do a bitchy heel promo like Sonny used to do back in the 90s? I don't know. I'd like to find out. And speaking of the House of Drek, well, the segment couldn't all be good, could it? Yeah, they had to remind us that group is still a thing, unfortunately. And they showed up afterwards and killed Andrade. I didn't care. I understand they're probably going to be regulars on the Collision show. For me, as long as they're still involved in all their spooky lighting trios matches that nobody gives a crap about, I'll take a hard pass, dog. And again, let me go back to my talking point earlier on. I said that, Punk's comment about this being the professional wrestling show, I was kind of hesitant to believe that by the end of watching this program. Here's the problem. If this is going to be a professional wrestling-based program, this House of Drek stuff does not belong. It belongs on Dynamite. Now, with that said, if they're going to remove all the hocus pocus bullshit, then maybe, possibly. The problem, though, is that they didn't remove any of it. It was still the same trios group that's been doing the same stuff on Dynamite. Appearing in the ring, disappearing, the blackouts, the weird, ominous music. It was all present here. So again, I go back to Punk's comment. Are we actually intended to take that seriously? I'm all for believing the idea that this will be the professional wrestling product. But you can't be doing shit like this. Maybe Malachi and Andrade in a regular singles match without the involvement of the other goons. I might be able to buy that. But if it's leading to some kind of six-man tag or something down the road, nope. I'm good. Thanks, though. But again, generally, good stuff in the match. The afterbirth we'll kind of ignore. But in terms of the wrestling here, no complaints. And I hope that Buddy isn't seriously injured because, he looked like he was in some real pain trying to put weight on that left ankle. Hopefully we hear more of an update. More good news coming our way, though. The return of Miro. Again. Yeah, how many times have we seen Miro appear and disappear in the span of the last year plus on AEW television? He's been in and out of purgatory several times over. And, well, hopefully God gave him a one-way bus pass out of purgatory. Because we needed him on this show for a long time. And, they milked the return a little bit here by sending out Tony Nese and Mark Sterling to do some cheap heat promos. Tony's out there mocking the Chicago fans, calling them fat. Telling them to put down the deep dish pizza so they can do some calisthenics. I did laugh too. In typical Kevin Kelly Caucasian delivery, The moment Miro interrupted Tony Nese's workout session with the crowd, he just nonchalantly goes, "Thank God, we've been redeemed." If you imagine how Kevin Kelly would say something like that, that's why it was funny. And again, the segment was exactly what it needed to be. I could have maybe done with a little less of the Tony Nese, Mark Sterling comedy, but in terms of Miro going out there and killing the guy in convincing fashion, got over with the Chicago crowd. Maybe went, 2-3 minutes? Miro threw him around for a while. He let Tony cut him off very momentarily with the Sterling distraction on the apron. But it was mostly a one-sided onslaught. The spot where Miro just caught Tony in a diving crossbody attempt with no effort. God, that guy is fucking strong. He's another guy too. Went away for a while, but when he came back, he was still in peak condition. Looked like he was hitting the gym hard. Take note, Adam Cole. You could maybe considering doing some workout sessions with Miro. Now they just need to do this shit with him every week. Depending on where they go with him in storyline. Maybe they send him in Luchasaurus and Christian Cage for the TNT title. I'd be all for that. Have him kill job guys in 2-minute TV squashes and then go after the belt that gave him purpose at one point. The one that God bestowed upon him for being great. Do it. Quit wasting time. Another thing I liked on the show, kind of shocking considering how horribly botched their booking's been for the last 6 months. The Acclaimed are still a thing. They're alive, by golly. They're still scissoring. And that's exactly what they came out to do here with Tony Schiavone and the rest of the Chicago crowd. I have no idea what the fuck those pants were that Tony was wearing. That entire outfit was just one of the poorest attempts I've ever seen at trying to channel Jim Cornette. But, they didn't really say or do much. Honestly, they didn't need to. They just came out to remind the fans that they're not dead. They did the 4-way scissor spot with Tony. Basically claimed that they're still on the hunt for the 6-man belts, which I'm more or less ambivalent about. That was it. Again, no jump attacks, no heat angles, just a very simple, quick babyface promo. I don't know what point it really served, but it got the Acclaimed on TV. And if that's going to be a regular thing on the Saturday shows, good. I still don't give a shit about the trios belts, but the Acclaimed have been ice cold for a long time now. We all know Punk loved working with them once upon a time. Is it going to be a case of career rejuvenation? Time will tell, I guess. No complaints. Although I will say this. I don't think I ever need to hear the words, "Scissor me, Nigel," from Kevin Kelly ever again. Not with that voice. Just, no. So with that, now that I've put over everything about this show that was great, you all know me, the bearer of bad news, the Eeyore of the professional wrestling world. Let me point out some clunkers here. There was a lot to like about this show. There really was. But it wasn't all perfect. The girls' match. My God, the girls' match. I've said it before. I'll repeat it again. There was no need for there to be a girls' match on this show. Certainly not the one they booked. Toni Storm and Ruby No-Go versus Willow Nightingale and Sky Blue. Whether or not this match was happening on Dynamite, Collision, Rampage, NXT, Ladies of Wrestling, Glow, or any of the fucking blacklisted women's companies on Pornhub, it still sucked. What you had here were four green girls having a really bad indie level match where they were lost for half of it, had no idea what they were doing. The jump start before the bell where they had all the chaotic shit happening at ringside, that was like straight out of something I'd be accustomed to seeing on Dynamite. And I really don't want to be seeing that on Collision. The random spot where they had the plant bitch slap the heels in plain view of God and everybody. Of course, was security there to immediately throw her out of the building? No, of course not. They just glossed right over it. Did they ever bother to explain who that girl was? No. It was just a random spot for the sake of doing it. Meanwhile, moments later, Willow nearly killed Ruby by body attacking her into the guardrail. And of course, you look at the size of her. I mean, she'd have no problem taking out a baby elephant. Then Sky Blue botched a Hurricane Rana off the apron where she basically came down and landed right on top of her head. That looked horrible. The other issue too, and again, it's a common recurring theme with a lot of AEW matches, aside from the floor brawling, which I've talked about before, letting things go way too long when they have no business doing so. Can anybody rationally explain this to me? Why did this match need to go through commercial? Was there one? No. Especially not with these four girls. Sky Blue in particular is awful. I mean, she showed a lot of fire and passion during her comeback, but that fire and passion only goes so far when she's throwing fake forearms and kicks that look like they're barely connecting. I still have no idea how Toni Storm hasn't killed anybody with that running hip attack in the corner. Like the whiplash those girls get from taking that move. It's enough to give somebody CTE. And as usual, they had to get way too creative and cute with the finish. It was just messy with all the hairspray shit. Like none of that looked fluid at all. It looked like a training session before the pay-per-view where everybody's in the ring going over spots to make sure people are in the right spots. And even in execution, it looked like everybody was out to lunch. You know, Sky Blue beating Toni Storm. Okay. Does anybody care? So she's from Chicago. Who gives a fuck? Why are they jobbing out their world champion to an underneath girl in a random match in the middle of the show? I'd like to know where the hell Thunder Rosa was during all this. Shouldn't she have a bone to pick with Toni over the women's title? Wasn't it Toni that became the interim champion right when Thunder Rosa had to relinquish the belt due to injury? Why wasn't Rosa out there to confront Toni? If you had to do a girls' match on the show, if not doing a Thunder Rosa squash, should have been Toni beating an underneath girl in short order, and then bam, here comes Thunder Rosa to confront Toni, and you set that feud up. Maybe have her beat up Ruby to get some babyface flurry going or something. And you're off to the races. At least I would have gotten a top of the card girl on the show instead of wasting a Toni Storm pin on the fucking girl with the porn name. But call me a stick in the mud. I don't know. Generally, though, when I look back, that was probably the only major dud of a segment on the entire show in terms of the on-screen product. And that's really not surprising to me. I kind of expected that to be the case. Now, with that said, let's talk about some behind-the-scenes issues that I had coming out of the show. And let me start with the obvious one. Yes, this was the pilot episode. So you're kind of just out there to dish out some material and reacquaint the fans with a lot of people we haven't seen on the show in a while, or people that have been buried and misused on the other channel for ages. In a lot of cases, this show is designed to be a damage control episode. By the time the show is over, what did they announce or build up to for next week? Anything? We had some leftover questions regarding the Punk promo, whatever is going to be happening with him and Joe. We had some minor angle development here and there. But as a whole, what big key storyline was set in stone at the end of this thing? What major angle happened to set up something on the card for next week? Did they even announce a card for next week? Or a segment? Or a promo? Or anything? If they did, I completely missed it. They announced a bunch of random shit for Dynamite that I don't care about. They ran down the Forbidden Door card again. But that was my biggest gripe I had when everything was over. What did they do to get me to want to tune in next week? There was no big hooking point at the end of the night that made me say, wow, that was awesome. I need to watch next week to see how they follow up with that cliffhanger. It was just, great, Punk's back. Cool. Now what? Again, you got a lot of diamonds in the rough right now on the show. Not a whole lot we're leaning our hat on right now outside the possibilities of what could happen. I would have loved to have maybe seen Miro get a follow-up promo. Reestablish what he wants to do. Maybe let Joe take a few minutes to remind us of his story between him and Punk. You know, interview time I think was gravely missing on the show. For a 2-hour program, it was very wrestling heavy. It's not a bad thing per se, but I mean, you had a lot of people on the show that we haven't seen in a long time. And again, if you don't follow the backstage drama, you really were given no reason as to why a lot of these names were missing for months at a time. Why was Miro gone for almost an entire year? Why was Andrade off TV for well over half a year? Where's Joe been? These are important questions that I think a lot of people would have liked to have more answers to. You know, and speaking of the whole 2-hour thing, that's going to be another grave concern going forward. Is 2 hours going to be too much? Do they have enough to fill a 2-hour show from week to week? Or should the show realistically only be an hour so that they don't overexpose any of the names they brought over? It's something I still worry about. This week it worked fine because they gave you enough content to keep you invested for 2 hours. Will that be a thing from week to week? Or is it going to be like Dynamite and SmackDown, where I'm usually only being given like 20 to 25 minutes of watchable material in a 2-hour block? At least for the kind of wrestling that I prefer to watch. The roster itself, I'm still kind of iffy on depending on who we see from week to week. I can't imagine this is going to be the full lineup. You know, there might be some other names that jump over from the Wednesday show, whether that's Ricky or MJF or, you know, whoever they don't plan on making room for on the trampoline stunt show programming. I mean, the company mascot was mercifully left off this thing, but wasn't there a rumor that he was going to be a regular on this show? Sounds like a fucking rotten idea. And again, we still don't know how this impacts the pay-per-view models or the ongoing feuds on either network. Are feuds going to carry over from the Wednesday shows to the Saturday shows? Are they going to keep everything relatively brand exclusive? I mean, the Acclaim said in their promo they're going to come back on Wednesday to do something. So obviously they're not exclusive to Collision. Does that account for others? I mean, there was a lot to be positive about coming out of the show, but I still have a lot of unanswered questions. It's kind of leaving me a little unsettled. This is still an experimental thing for AEW. And we don't know how these numbers are going to reflect in the long term. Keep in mind, it's a weekend show. Obviously, this means AEW won't be running Saturday night pay-per-view specials anytime soon. Which sucks because I hate Sunday night pay-per-views. I still appreciate the fact that they're planning on actually branding the program as the wrestling show, as opposed to the Wednesday night chaos we get every week where people are doing everything but lighting each other on fire. It's not a perfect show, but it's leaps and bounds more watchable. At least it appears to be after one sitting. Things can very quickly change. But, again, the one thing we're going to have to remember is, yes, they were in Chicago. That is heavy Punk territory. How does that translate outside that market? What happens when they're in Toronto next week? What happens when they're in front of more hostile AEW crowds? Is that going to be like a Bret Hart in Canada type thing where Punk will be face on his home turf, but he'll be heel everywhere else? I mean, that could be fascinating, although it'll be virtually impossible to keep his TV feud straight. You know, if he's bouncing around from face to heel depending on the venue, you're not going to be able to do any real long-term sustainable programs with him. Especially if you're trying to do like traditional face and heel dynamics, like him and MJF being the notable example. It's a work in progress. We'll just leave it at that. For the time being, this was a strong first showing. Again, bear in mind, it's week 1. The bloom isn't off the rose after one show. There are things to like, things to be optimistic about, things I'm still kind of questioning in the long term. But for now, the Saturday thing looks like it'll be worth my investment. We'll reflect on the Dynamite show and see how things fare over there. You know, this coming Wednesday, it looks like they're doing a bunch of circle jerk New Japan AEW video game matches. So the cult audience will have a ball fapping off to that one. How much of it I plan on watching, I don't know. It's still up in the air. I will say, as far as the Forbidden Door thing goes, what is that, next weekend? God almighty. Too many pay-per-views. But I'm playing that one by ear. I'll probably watch a couple matches on that card that interest me. Okada versus Danielson I'll probably watch. I still don't know about Omega versus Ospreay. But as far as me sitting down and actually torturing myself through a full 3+ hour card of AEW New Japan video game dream matches, fuck that noise. With all the other shit I have going on right now, I don't need to be dealing with that. Don't expect a thorough pay-per-view recap next weekend. You know, if you only hear me talk about 1 or 2 matches, you'll know why. It's because I wasn't interested in watching a bunch of multi-man matches with guys that couldn't draw money with green crayon and printer paper. And I know that line is stolen too. Shut up. It's a good line. So, yeah. That was AEW Collision. Plus a couple other things we talked about. So, yeah. Feel free to chime in. If you have any other thoughts on the show that I did not address or something you'd like to elaborate on in more detail, feel free, man. It is an open comment section for all. And we'll see what happens this coming week with the Dynamite program. My expectations are not a lot. So, catch you guys on the flip side. Thanks for tuning in. Take care. Peace.